when Prime Minister Mark Carney unleashed a barrage of attacks on Karoline Leavitt at a Brussels press conference, hammering Trump's tariff stance and mocking U.S. policy. He believed his polished entitlement would dominate the stage. But in a masterful counterstrike, Leavitt turned the tables, leaving the global press corps stunned into silence. A tense silence fills the room as Carney's words hang in the air, his smug smile reflecting the belief that he had won the room. He leans back, confidently adjusting his tie. But then, without warning, Karoline steps forward. The eyes of every journalist in the room snap to her. She meets Carney's gaze, unwavering. The air shifts as if a storm is about to break. Her voice cuts through the tension, sharp and deliberate. "You lecture us about sovereignty while hiding behind foreign flags. Sit down, Prime Minister." The audience freezes. Carney's expression falters, just for a split second before he recovers his composure. But it's too late. The damage is done. The room is no longer his. Before you dive into this electrifying showdown, share your thoughts in the comments. Which corner of the U.S. do you represent? Subscribe now to catch every moment of this high-stakes political drama. The Grand Brussels Conference Hall stands bathed in soft light, its high, vaulted ceiling echoing the weight of decades of diplomatic history. Flags from NATO, the EU, and the U.S. ripple gently in the quiet air, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the heavy tension that fills the room. Journalists from CBC, CNN, and Axios murmur in hushed tones, their notebooks open, pens poised, anticipating the verbal battle that is about to unfold. The subtle hum of camera shutters is the only sound breaking the stillness, each flash illuminating the faces of the world's most powerful figures as they prepare for the confrontation. The room itself is a study in contrasts. Elegant chandeliers, casting their warm golden light over polished mahogany panels while sharp, cold silence hangs in the air. The stakes could not be higher. A global summit, called to address President Trump's new tariffs, has drawn representatives from every corner of the world. Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, stands confidently in front of the gathered leaders. His navy suit is impeccable, his posture rigid with authority. He speaks with the ease of a man used to commanding attention, his voice smooth as he outlines the principles of Canada's trade policy. At the far end of the room, Karoline Leavitt stands, a bright firebrand among the stoic diplomats. She is positioned at the edge of the podium, listening with a slight furrow in her brow. A young press secretary, and for many, a rising star of the Trump administration, she is underrated by those around her. Her confidence is a stark contrast to the calm authority of Carney, but her posture reveals the simmering intensity beneath the surface. Every word she says is carefully measured, and yet, the air crackles with the knowledge that her retort could set the room ablaze. The tension in the air is palpable. Carney speaks of Canada's sovereign rights, the strength of its economic relationship with the U.S., and the firm resolve to protect Canadian jobs. Leavitt watches, her eyes narrowing slightly, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. The press corps watches. Every reporter from Toronto Star to Global News is leaning forward in anticipation. The political collision of these two world powers is inevitable, and the world stage is set. Carney steps confidently to the podium, his polished demeanor exuding the calm of a seasoned politician who knows the room is his. His navy suit hugs his frame perfectly, a symbol of both power and precision. As he adjusts the microphone, the room falls into an almost reverent silence, save for the occasional rustle of paper or the faint click of a camera shutter. He begins, his voice rich and authoritative, each word calculated to command attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues, and global leaders," Carney begins, "Canada has always been a strong partner of the United States. We have long been the conscience of North America, guiding the continent with integrity and mutual respect. It is through our commitment to fairness, to prosperity, that we ensure a brighter future for both our nations." His words are smooth, rehearsed too smooth. There's a certain smugness that hangs in the air as he continues, almost as if he's speaking from a place of moral superiority, cloaked in the garb of diplomacy. He speaks of the shared values between Canada and the U.S., but there's a subtle undercurrent of entitlement in his tone, as if the relationship between their two countries was built solely on Canada's sacrifice and benevolence. "We provide energy, raw materials, and vital resources to the U.S., Carney continues. "Our trade partnership is not just a transaction. It's a bond that enriches both nations, a bond that cannot be broken without consequences." The audience listens intently, but there's a subtle edge to Carney's words that no one dares to acknowledge. He makes it clear that any action against Canada, such as President Trump's tariffs, will be seen as a violation of that sacred bond. He pauses, letting the weight of his words sink in. A slight smirk tugs at the corner of his lips as he surveys the room, knowing that his message is landing exactly as planned. Karoline Leavitt, sitting on the edge of her seat, remains stone-faced. Her eyes narrow slightly, but there's no reaction. She doesn't blink, doesn't flinch. She watches Carney as he continues, unaware of the fire slowly building in her. Canada first, Carney declares, his voice growing louder with emphasis. We must focus on protecting our own sovereignty, our industries, our workers. We cannot allow the forces of economic coercion to dictate our future. This is not just a matter of trade, it's a matter of national security. The phrase Canada first hangs in the air, a deliberate echo of the rhetoric that has become familiar in North American politics. Carney's words are designed to frame him as the defender of national interests, the protector of sovereignty. It's a masterstroke in political positioning, presenting himself as the voice of reason in the face of growing tensions. As Carney continues, his speech becomes increasingly self-congratulatory, his gaze sweeping over the room as though expecting applause. The room is still, but the tension is palpable. Journalists from CBC, Global News, and Axios scribble furiously in their notebooks, their pens barely keeping up with his assertions. But in the midst of the applause that's sure to follow, one can't help but notice the subtle shift in the room, the way some aides exchange quick glances or how a Japanese reporter tilts his head as if unsure about the rhetoric they're hearing. Even the U.S. representatives in the room seem to shift in their seats, sensing a growing unease. Karoline doesn't react, her posture stiff as a board. The press has already begun to whisper, the buzz escalating around her, as if the room is holding its breath. She knows what's coming next. The moment Carney finishes his speech, the room holds its breath. The silence is pregnant with anticipation. Karoline Leavitt, standing near the edge of the room, rises slowly. Every step toward the podium is deliberate, measured. She doesn't rush, yet her presence commands the room. The American flag lapel on her blazer catches the light, a subtle reminder of where her loyalties lie. As she approaches, her gaze locks with Carney's. There's no pretension in her movements. She is all fierce determination, unapologetically confident. The air is thick with the weight of what's about to unfold. She grabs the microphone, her voice immediately sharp and unyielding. Prime Minister Carney, she begins, her voice cutting through the tense silence like a blade. You speak of Canada first. Well, allow me to remind you that the U.S. has been subsidizing your defense for decades. And yet, here you stand, mocking us at every turn, throwing out your economic posturing like a badge of honor. Economic cosplay, if you will. The room shifts. The murmurs start as she speaks, growing in intensity. Carney's jaw tightens, the veins in his neck pulsing ever so slightly. He doesn't react yet, but his discomfort is palpable. Karoline doesn't give him a chance to respond. You claim sovereignty, but how can you truly claim independence when you depend on U.S. defense? How can you lecture us on trade when your military budget is propped up by American taxpayers? You mock our policies, yet we're the ones footing the bill to protect your borders, to protect your people. A Fox News reporter in the back of the room lets out a quiet chuckle, drawing the attention of the others. The tension thickens. The Canadian delegation shifts nervously in their seats. The camera flashes increase, the air crackling with electric anticipation. You know, Prime Minister, Karoline continues, her words deliberate and searing. You say we depend on you for trade, but the truth is far more inconvenient for you. We've been redirecting our energy exports to other partners, Europe, Asia, and Japan. You may think you can bully us with tariffs, but what happens when your refineries start scrambling for Canadian oil? What happens when your precious uranium, the fuel for your nuclear plants, begins to run dry? Her words are sharp daggers, cutting through the carefully constructed narrative Carney had just spun. The room is quiet now, as if everyone collectively holds their breath waiting for Carney's response. Let's be clear, she adds, her tone now dripping with calculated precision. The U.S. doesn't need Canada's trade dependency. We don't need to rely on anyone, and certainly not you. We've been independent for over 200 years. You say Canada first, but we say America first. You follow us, Prime Minister. We're the ones leading." Her voice rises with brash certainty, daring Carney to argue. She slams her printed speech on the podium, the sound loud enough to make everyone jump. The reporters in the room glance at each other, eyes wide, scribbling furiously. This is no longer a mere discussion. It's an outright battle. The power shift is visible now. The tension in the room is thick as fog. Carney, who moments ago stood at the center of the stage as the figurehead of Canadian nationalism, now seems like a man on the back foot. His posture stiffens, but there's a flicker of discomfort. He knows this isn't going as planned. The very room he thought was his to command has begun to turn against him. Karoline stands there for a moment, letting her words sink in. She looks directly at him, unblinking. Then, her gaze sweeps across the room, meeting the eyes of the reporters, the aides, the delegates from other nations. Her confidence is palpable, unshakable. She's taken control. The U.S. delegation watches her with a quiet pride, some even nodding. They know she's speaking truth. Meanwhile, the Canadian team grows, uneasy, their leader under siege. A journalist from CBC whispers to her colleague, "She's really giving it to him." The room holds its breath as Karoline finishes her strike. Her words have landed with the precision of a scalpel, and for a brief moment, Carney stands frozen. The air is thick with anticipation. It's his turn now, and he knows it. With a measured breath, Carney steps forward, his eyes narrowing slightly as he readies himself to respond. The microphone crackles in his hand and he adjusts it as if trying to regain his composure. He's not used to being on the defensive. His calm exterior is the armor he's always relied on. But now, that armor feels suddenly flimsy. "Let's get one thing straight," Carney says, his voice still smooth but with a noticeable edge. "The United States is deeply reliant on Canada for vital resources. You might try to spin this as a one-sided relationship, but the truth is far from that." He pauses, letting the words sink in as he glances around the room, assessing his audience. He sees the cameras, the reporters scribbling notes, the way the EU and US representatives are now leaning forward, watching his every move. "Did you know," Carney continues, his voice rising slightly with calculated authority, "that 20% of US oil comes from Canada? It's not just about trade, it's about survival. Without Canada, your refineries would come to a standstill." Room is quiet, save for the sound of camera shutters and the scribbling of pens. The energy shifts. Carney's tone is still polished, but there's an underlying tension now, like a thread stretched too tight. He swallows hard and presses on. "But it's not just oil," he adds. "Canada fuels your nuclear plants. We supply 70% of the uranium that powers your energy grid. Without us, your nuclear plants would be in jeopardy." A ripple of whispers spreads through the room. Karoline's face remains stone cold, but her smirk grows ever so slightly. She knows that Carney is trying to regain control, but it's already clear. His attempt to throw facts back at her is not as convincing as he hoped. "If the United States wants to be independent," Carney continues, the tightness in his voice more noticeable now, "they can't afford to ignore us. You can't simply cut off ties with a neighbor who supplies you with such critical resources." There's a faint quiver in his voice, an indication that the cool, calm, collected Carney is starting to crack, and the audience picks up on it. The energy in the room has shifted once again. A Japanese aide leans toward his EU counterpart, their quiet conversation filled with murmurs of approval, but discomfort too. Carney's words may be backed by facts, but his delivery is beginning to feel more like desperation than confidence. His authority is no longer as unshakable as it once was. Karoline, however, stands unruffled. She folds her arms, her gaze never leaving Carney, a subtle smirk playing on her lips as she waits for him to finish. It's as though she knows exactly what he's going to say. But the real fight is not in the numbers, it's in the room, in the emotional dynamics. "Canada isn't just your trade partner," Carney concludes, his words now measured but tinged with frustration. "We are a vital part of your national security, your energy infrastructure, and your economic strength. To dismiss that relationship is not just foolish, it's reckless." The room is silent, but the underlying tension is palpable. Karoline's eyes narrow slightly, and her smirk grows ever so slightly wider. The audience is now caught in a suspended moment, unsure of what will happen next. Will Carney regain control, or has Karoline planted the seeds of doubt too effectively? As Carney finishes speaking, his confidence in the facts begins to unravel. His words hang in the air like a cloud, but the silence is now too heavy, too charged. He stands tall, waiting for the applause or the acknowledgement of his words, but there is none. Karoline, who has been watching him intently, steps forward. Without hesitation, she interrupts, cutting him off mid-sentence, her tone sharp as a whip. The room stirs, the cameras refocusing on her. A subtle shift in the air as if everyone in the room senses that something is about to change. She doesn't wait for permission to speak. She simply takes the microphone, her presence dominating the space. With all due respect, Prime Minister, Karoline begins, her voice clear and assertive, you've conveniently forgotten to mention that the United States is already pivoting to other energy partners. We don't need Canada's oil, and we certainly don't need your dependency on our resources. A murmur of disbelief ripples through the room. Carney freezes, his hand gripping the podium a little too tightly. The once sure grip on the conversation now feels like slipping sand. Karoline's words are a direct challenge to everything he just said, an unexpected move that shifts the dynamics entirely. Just this week, she continues, Governor Mike DeWine of Ohio and Governor Greg Abbott of Texas both stated that the U.S. is looking toward alternative suppliers for both energy and uranium. They've already opened the door to reduced reliance on Canada, Prime Minister. The room feels the shift. Karoline stands firm, throwing the facts back into Carney's face, but this time her words have teeth. As she speaks, Carney's posture begins to change. The previously confident Prime Minister is now fiddling with a document, his eyes flicking from his notes to Karoline's unwavering gaze, unable to respond quickly enough. If you're so confident that Canada holds all the cards, Karoline presses, her voice now rising with purpose, then why is it that American leaders are already seeking other partners? Is it possible that your position isn't as strong as you think? Her voice rings through the room with sharp clarity, every word landing with precision. The reporters, many of whom had been hanging on Carney's every word, now shift their focus. A CBC journalist who had been scribbling notes throughout the debate begins writing even faster, her pen moving across the page with renewed urgency. She knows the moment has changed. The room is no longer Carney's. For a brief moment, Carney stumbles, his eyes darting to the page in front of him, then back up at Karoline, but his composure is starting to crack. His fingers fumble with the paper, an almost imperceptible gesture that shows his growing uncertainty. Karoline doesn't let up. Her words hit harder now, undeniable in their force. You talk about sovereignty, but your nation is already turning. It's back on Canada's oil and gas. They're already looking elsewhere. If Canada wants to lead, Prime Minister, it must stop leaning on the U.S. for economic survival. A moment of silence follows. Carney's face hardens, but there's nothing left to say, not without risking further undermining his position. The room hums with the energy of the shift, and reporters exchange looks of disbelief, their pens moving faster than ever. Carney looks down at his notes, but his mind is elsewhere. He clears his throat, trying to regain his footing, but the damage is already done. The air has shifted, and Karoline now stands as the dominant force in the room. The room is heavy with tension, but Karoline Leavitt's presence is now undeniable. As Carney tries to regain his composure, she steps forward once more. This time, there is no calculated tone, no sharp statistics, only raw emotion, the kind that is sure to grab the audience by the throat. She leans into the microphone, her voice calm at first, but you can hear the undercurrent of something far fiercer just beneath the surface. Let me remind you, Prime Minister, Karoline begins, her voice cutting through the murmur in the room. This isn't just about trade deals or economic strategy. This is about our people, the men and women who work day in and day out, who sacrifice everything so that we, as a nation, can stand strong. She pauses for a beat, her eyes scanning the room, locking with various delegates, as if making sure they understand the weight of her words. Carney watches her, his grip tightening on the podium. His confidence, once brimming, begins to look more like nervous tension. We have American soldiers defending our freedoms across the globe, she continues, her voice rising with raw patriotism. We have farmers in the Midwest who work the land, steel workers in Pennsylvania who build our economy with their own hands. They don't kneel for anyone. We don't kneel for trade. We trade from strength, because that's who we are. A moment of silence follows her words, but it's not awkward. It's the silence before something momentous. The weight of her statement lands like a bombshell. Her voice quivers with passion, and the room, every eye fixed on her, is drawn into her narrative. And yet you stand here trying to lecture us on sovereignty. Caroline continues, her eyes narrowing. You say we need your oil, your resources, but let me tell you something, Prime Minister. Your oil barrel stats, your uranium, your hydroelectric power, they don't define our worth. We define it. We've stood tall before. We'll stand tall again. The room shifts. For the first time, the Canadian reporters in the back begin to glance at each other, a hint of discomfort creeping into their expressions. It's as though they can feel the power of Caroline's words. Even the foreign diplomats seem to take notice, some nodding ever so slightly, as if acknowledging the undeniable force of her patriotism. The U.S. has always been a nation of strength, Caroline adds, her words now deliberate, pointed. We don't bow, we don't bend, and we don't kneel, not for trade, not for anyone. A wave of applause breaks out from the U.S. delegation, and a few of the Canadian journalists shift uncomfortably in their seats. Caroline's influence in the room is undeniable now. She's not just a press secretary anymore. She's the voice of a nation that refuses to be bullied, that stands on its own terms. We've been independent for over 2 centuries, she finishes, a confident smile creeping onto her lips, and will remain strong no matter what. Canada can't tell us how to act, how to trade, or how to lead. We lead by strength, and that's something you'll never understand. The applause erupts louder. The camera flashes continue to illuminate her as she stands tall, unbowed. Carney, on the other hand, shifts uncomfortably. His attempt to maintain control over the room is slipping away. Karoline Leavitt has won the room, and Carney knows it. Carney stands frozen for a moment, his lips slightly parted as if searching for the right words, but there is no immediate response. His confident facade has cracked, and he knows it. His usual calm demeanor seems to betray him. He clears his throat, his voice slightly hoarse as he begins to speak, but this time there's an undercurrent of desperation in his tone. Well, Carney begins, his words coming out slower, more deliberate. We all know that global instability has been the major factor here. These aren't just trade wars. This is about maintaining global peace, security, managing the unpredictability of international politics. His attempt to regain control feels like an act of desperation. The room listens, but the energy has shifted. The audience that had once hung on his every word now seems detached, some leaning forward in eager anticipation for Caroline's next move. The reporters are no longer hanging on Carney's every word. They've shifted their focus, waiting for his inevitable collapse. Caroline stands arms crossed, her gaze steady and unbothered. She leans against the podium, the faintest smirk on her lips. She doesn't interrupt, but her silence is louder than any words could be. Her eyes lock with Carney's as if waiting for him to dig his own grave. I'm not sure if you're fully understanding the situation here, Prime Minister. A Canadian reporter presses, her voice cool but firm. You say global instability, but can you explain how Canada's sovereignty will be affected by the U.S.'s shift to other trade partners? Carney's jaw tightens, and his hand trembles slightly as he reaches for the stack of documents in front of him. He fumbles for a moment, unable to steady himself. The subtle movement does not go unnoticed. His usual composure is starting to slip, and the cameras catch every moment. As I said, Carney continues, his voice wavering slightly. The situation is far more complex than you, but his voice trails off. He clears his throat again, wiping the back of his hand against his forehead. The sweat beads on his forehead become more noticeable now. His eyes flicker nervously to the crowd, and for the first time he looks like a man who isn't entirely in control. Someone from the back of the room mutters low enough for Caroline to hear but loud enough for others to catch. He's lost the room. The words hang in the air. The weight of them seems to settle like a heavy burden on Carney's shoulders. He straightens, trying to look composed, but the cracks in his entitlement are now impossible to ignore. The room, once heavy with tension in his favor, has shifted. The Canadian delegation no longer stands tall. The silent applause of the U.S. reporters from earlier seems to mock him now. Caroline's influence is palpable. She hasn't even moved from her spot, but the room is turning in her favor. Carney's hand shakes again as he grabs a folded tissue from his pocket, carefully dabbing at his forehead. The subtle body language cues are telling. He's visibly losing his grip, and his polished image, once an impenetrable armor, is now pierced with every word Caroline speaks. Prime Minister Carney, with all due respect, your rhetoric doesn't change the facts. Karoline interrupts again, this time with even more confidence, barely acknowledging his presence. Your government is losing ground to American leadership. She stands there, unshaken, while Carney stumbles for a response. The power dynamic has shifted completely. The room's attention is no longer with Carney. It has moved to Karoline, and Carney knows it. Karoline leans into the microphone one last time, her eyes narrowing slightly as she watches Carney struggle. The room is silent, the tension palpable. Everyone is waiting for the final word, the one that will either land her as the undeniable victor or leave room for Carney to somehow recover. But Karoline is done playing by his rules. With a smirk that says it all, she delivers the final blow, her voice steady but sharp as a razor. If Canada wants to lead the world, she pauses for just a fraction of a second, letting the room hang on her words. It should try leading itself out of America's gas lines. The words hang in the air, cutting through the tension like a knife. The mic drop moment hits. For a moment it seems as though the world pauses. The reporters, the aides, the Canadian delegation, all freeze. Then, almost in slow motion, the room erupts. The laughter is loud and unexpected, a wave of relief breaking the previously stiff atmosphere. Canadian aides exchange glances, their faces a mix of discomfort and confusion. The camera flashes click in rapid succession, catching every angle of Karoline's victory. Carney stands at the podium, blinking in disbelief. His lips part, but no words come out. He is utterly defeated, his attempts at maintaining control reduced to nothing more than an afterthought. The man who once stood so confidently in front of the room now looks like a ghost, unable to muster any retort. The camera zooms in on his face, eyes wide, mouth slightly agape, as the full impact of Karoline's word sinks in. He stands alone, his bravado shattered, while Karoline walks off the stage, the applause building around her. The aftermath of the Brussels press conference ripples out like a shockwave across the globe. Within minutes of Karoline Leavitt's devastating mic drop, social media explodes. Carney crushed trends globally, with tweets pouring in from every corner of the world. The line Karoline delivered about Canada's dependence on American oil spreads like wildfire. People are laughing, commenting, and sharing the clip. It's the kind of moment that defines a political landscape. Her stare down, the sharp words, and Carney's stunned silence make the rounds as viral clips. Viewers are unable to look away from the awkwardness of the Canadian Prime Minister, caught completely off guard, unable to respond to her direct attack. As the hashtag begins trending, Tim Hortons memes explode online. Users Photoshop Carney's face onto advertisements for the beloved Canadian coffee brand, mocking him with phrases like, "sipped the wrong brew today," and "tasted defeat." The memes flood Twitter, Instagram, and even TikTok. The humor is biting, but beneath it all is the clear message: Carney has lost the room. On the news networks, the headlines start rolling in. Karoline Leavitt wrecks global forum. CNN's dramatic take on the fallout. Ottawa speechless. The Guardian captures the stunned silence in Carney's camp. Even European allies who had initially been wary of the U.S. look on with a sense of quiet approval. There's a noticeable shift in tone among the diplomats and leaders. While they don't openly admit it, the way Carney faltered doesn't go unnoticed. Some of them even nod in approval, perhaps recognizing the shift in power that has just occurred. As Karoline boards her flight back to the United States, her phone buzzes incessantly. It's not just journalists now. Her colleagues, political allies, and even some international leaders have reached out to congratulate her on her unflinching performance. She pauses briefly as a reporter calls out to her from across the terminal. "What's next, Karoline? What's your next move after this major victory?" She turns toward the camera, the smile on her face unmistakable. There's no trace of arrogance, just the quiet confidence of someone who has dominated the moment. "We'll see who's really first," Karoline responds, her tone playful, but with an edge of determined resolve. Her words linger in the air, like a challenge, and the world is now waiting to see where this rising star will go next. Are you with Carney or Leavitt? Comment below, like, subscribe, and watch who falls next.